Good evening and welcome to the collaboration you did not know you needed, the collaboration we didn't know we needed until Penn State and Notre Dame ended up playing each other in the college football playoff semifinal at the Orange Bowl. This is the independent Notre Dame podcast featuring myself and Pete Sampson, and the Nittany Dispatch, a Nittany Lions podcast featuring Audrey, Snyder, and John Sauber, who's expected to join us later in the show. Guys, good to see you like this. You guys are out of the snowstorms of the Midwest, down in sunny Florida. I'm here in spirit with my Orange Bowl Q-Zip. Looking forward to seeing the game Thursday. I'll start with Audrey. Can you just give like a quick 2-minute rundown for Notre Dame fans about what to expect out of this Penn State team on Thursday?
Yeah, I mean, this is a Penn State team that right now is trending in the right direction, right? We always talk about you want to be playing your best football late in the year. Well, that's what they're doing. Now, the challenge here is the fact that their playoff path has been super favorable. We all said when the bracket came out, oh, here's Penn State with this great favorable path. They have to beat SMU and then Boise State to end up here. Well, that kind of changed the goalposts a bit, right? Like heading into this postseason, originally, like all year, I was saying for Penn State, well, if they can get in and win a playoff game at home, like I think that constitutes a successful season. Well, then you get the group of 5 in there, and then you demolish them. Then it's like, all right, the goalpost moved again, and now it feels like we're still kind of back to, in some regards, the James Franklin big game narrative. And can they finally punch up in a game they're not favored in, right? They were like 10 and a half point favorites in their first 2 games. And to Penn State's credit, I mean, they demolished both of those opponents. Like, it was very clear in the trenches that this was a better team, a more talented team. But now, is Abdul Carter healthy, right? The star edge rusher, that's the big storyline here this week. James Franklin playing it close to the vest, as we'd expect, and said, you know, he knows that Carter's going to do everything he can to play, but also how effective can he be or how effective will he be? That's the big storyline. And then you look with the offense, it's Drew Allar, and how consistent can he be? Because this is a guy, you know, we've all seen the rumblings about, is Allar someone who potentially could be one of the best quarterbacks, given that this is a down draft class? Well, he said he's coming back to Penn State. So unless something changes here, and I think maybe a national championship would kind of change things for sure, then, you know, he's planning to come back, but we'll see. And Penn State right now, they're running the ball really well. So I think that's the kind of thing. We're going to see 2 tremendous defenses. Notre Dame, obviously, with the special teams plays there, could create some challenges. But for me, it's Penn State and the fact that this offense has been able to consistently put up 30-plus points. But again, it feels like we're grading on a curve a little bit over here, coming off of games against SMU and Boise State.
Yeah, it feels like Penn State beat Indiana twice, to put it in Notre Dame terms.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was sort of the vibe around Notre Dame, for me at least. It was like, when you're judging success of the season or not, it's like you had to beat a Power 5 team in the playoff, but then when that first Power 5 team was Indiana, you're like, well, we'd like it to be somebody a little bit more than that. And I'm so interested to sort of see on Thursday night, like Notre Dame sort of kicked whatever is like on top of James Franklin right now. Like Notre Dame sort of kicked that with the 31-year major bowl streak. Beating Georgia totally counts. Starting quarterback or backup. But I guess I never got the sense that like Notre Dame itself was weighed down by that streak. Whereas in the case of James Franklin, like, do you get like, how much does this bug him? The sort of narrative, because it reminds me a little bit of Brian Kelly at the end.
Reminds me a lot of Brian Kelly at the end.
When I think I asked him after what was his last bowl game at Notre Dame, like, what's your first next steps after they got blown out by Alabama? And he like was not having it at all. But I was just like, that's the only thing there is to talk about with Notre Dame. And I wonder how much like Penn State is in a similar lane with James Franklin.
I think they're in so much of a lane with it that after the Ohio State game, James Franklin told us that he came into that game expecting to win, so much so that he had a little post-game, sounded like a bit of a rant, tirade maybe, ready to go. And I think, and I'm fairly certain what he wanted to say was, hey, we are an elite team. Look how far we've come since I put the benchmark on us and that great to elite thing. Here we are, we've arrived, we're going to puff out our chest. Look at what we've done. We've punched up, we beat Ohio State. But instead they lost again. And it's like, well, I think you kind of have to save the speech. And I guess I'm anticipating at this point, like if they win Thursday night, I'm like, oh, maybe we get the speech, or maybe he just doesn't even care at that point. Yeah, I think it definitely weighs on him because I think, these coaches, they're humans at the end of the day. They're very in tune to what we're saying and writing and kind of the narratives. And for Penn State, like that is the storyline. And you get the home playoff game and you kind of, right, you did that, but unfairly in some regards because of the path they got. It just feels like the goalposts keep moving. And then it was like, well, hey, now you got to make it to the semifinal and show that you're one of the four best. And even now that they're here, it's like, all right, we're down to the final four teams, and people are still like, well, can Penn State win a big game? Like, it's kind of weird. Like, how do we classify, a total beatdown of Boise State and total beatdown of SMU? It's a little weird.
It's interesting to me too, right? Like, you hear this more than I do, Audrey, but like I'll hear all the time, oh, Franklin's, big game choker. He can't do this, he can't do that. I'm like, well, Jim Harbaugh's as good as everyone says he is. Why did it take him 9 years and a lot of controversy to win at a bigger and better program? Like, I just think right now, and this is going to change in 2 weeks, but there are two coaches right now who have national title rings. Notre Dame just beat the living crap out of one of them. There's going to be a third who enters that group in a couple of weeks. Maybe it's James Franklin, maybe it's Marcus Freeman. It's probably going to be Ryan Day, but like it's to me, the way the goalposts keep moving with everyone is interesting, especially like in Notre Dame's case. And this is not to take away from anything they did. Brian Kelly made a national title game in year 3 with a much worse roster and a much bigger hole to dig out of than Marcus Freeman did when he took over. So I'm just fascinated by like the fan base reactions with both these coaches and both these programs going into this game.
Yeah, no, I think the other part of this too, and again, I think it speaks to like the expectation was like get to the semifinal. All the Penn State fans, or most that I've been talking to kind of throughout this playoff run, what I kept asking them was like, okay, you guys got this surprise trip to the Big Ten title game, and you hang with Oregon, you lose, but you hung with them. What games are you paying to go to? Like, how do you kind of finance a playoff run? And one of the things that I heard most common was Miami. If Penn State gets to Miami, we're going. We're showing up. And like, as you guys know, makes sense. This is the easier one after the Fiesta Bowl last round. But this was kind of like, this has been the one that's been circled. And it's like the expectation has been that they will get here. And obviously unfairly so. It's like, hey, you're begging on these guys winning 2 games. But the thing that Penn State has done really well, and it does not matter right now, but they've taken care of business winning the games that they should. Like that to me is the thing that these James Franklin teams have done. It's like when they're favored, like absolutely you are in luck. But when they're the underdog or when it's even a tight matchup, that's when things get really interesting. And that's where, at this point in the year, we can kind of pick and choose and say, well, Penn State's best win is what, right? Well, you got to go with Boise State at this point. You were up 10-0 on Ohio State and you blew it. And I think that's and your audience doesn't want to hear this, but imagine, Matt, you would understand this. All of the kind of the demons that would be exercised if Penn State can beat Notre Dame and then beat Ohio State perhaps for a national title. It's like the Penn State fan dream there in some regards, as Pitt has to sit at home and watch, right?
That runway would be extended before you got home, Audrey.
Oh man, the runway. Here we go, talking about the runway.
I would like to not. Yeah, I would like to not talk about runways the entire show, as I sat on one for 2 hours today. So,
welcome, John Sauber.
If only someone
show, as promised.
Knew that the snow was coming and it was gonna hit the East Coast, man.
I don't want to have this argument with Audrey on the podcast, but there were no alternatives. I made the best with what I could do, and we are here, and that's the important thing.
I have a history question for everyone, probably best for Audrey, maybe John. I don't know if you're covering them then. Why didn't Al Golden become Penn State's coach 2014? There were published reports at the time indicating he would be. I think everyone at the time was a little bit surprised he stayed in Miami. From your knowledge and recollection, what happened there?
Man, I barely remember what I ate for lunch, and now you want me to go back a decade. Yeah, I remember the reports at the time, and I remember that it was like the expectation that he was going to be the guy. I don't think, from what I'm recalling, I don't think there was ever a ton of traction to it. I think it was just like, this makes a lot of sense. Penn State's going to continue to hire within the family, so to speak, within the people who've been there. And then, of course, they kind of go out in a different direction. But yeah, gosh, man, you're making me feel old now. That was 10 years ago.
This
or
is
I guess
the part
10
where I
plus.
Lifetime ago, if you're Al Golden.
Yeah, this is the part where I mentioned that I was 19 then, which ages everybody on the podcast. And so, no, I do not recall what was going on then.
Well, I heard James Franklin refer to Al Golden as like one of ours
Yes.
in his press conference. So clearly he wants to, tug on those roots a little bit. It was funny.
Yeah.
Like there was a Notre Dame player. We asked him like, "Hey, did you know that Al Golden played at Penn State and scored a touchdown in Notre Dame Stadium?" And he's like, "No way. Are you serious? That is insane." So yeah, if you want to know how much the current football players remember past college football players, very, very little.
Worth noting as we talk about Al Golden, Cincinnati Bengals, his old employer, now have a DC opening after firing Lou Anarumo today. I don't know what that means. I think Al's happy and well paid at Notre Dame, but as I say with everyone in this business, strike while the iron is hot. As Lou Anarumo was the hottest thing in coaching, 2 years ago, and just got fired. So you got to do what you got to do.
Bag when you can.
Exactly. Personnel wise, I feel like these teams are very, very similar. Very, very good on defense. Both have two very good running backs. Both have receiving cores that haven't exactly lit the world on fire, but both seem to be hitting their stride at the right time now in the playoff. I'm curious, anyone could take this, but ultimately, what do you think is the difference between these two teams on the field?
Yeah, I think specifically offensively, they both have one differentiator that separates themselves. For Notre Dame, it's Riley Leonard's mobility. For Penn State, it's Tyler Warren, right? It's the idea that they have this one weapon they can go to in the passing game that can create offense, that can be a legitimate number one receiver despite not being a wide receiver. And for all the good rushing attacks that Penn State has faced this year and kind of stifled, I don't think they've faced one that has two high-end running backs and a quarterback that could reasonably go for 1,000 yards in any year, right? Like I think that's going to be the differentiator here, and that's the one thing that stuck out to me. As I say all the time on the Nittany Dispatch, I'm a dork. I watch too much all 22, and it really stands out how much more mobile Riley Leonard is than I think most quarterbacks Penn State has faced, and I think that's going to be the toughest thing to deal with, especially with the Abdul Carter question kind of looming, because he's their best option to spy him, to kind of mirror him the entire game.
Yeah, and Leonard has this weird, like, looks slow but is fast vibe about him. And I even talked to some Georgia players about it pregame or at media day down in New Orleans, and they're like, yeah, it's, you watch him and you're like, okay, like I can hawk this guy down, no problem. And then he's flipping over you and getting a first down. It's just like, he seems like a real pain to defend all over the field, but particularly in the red zone. Like I feel like if Notre Dame wins on Thursday, that Leonard's legs are going to have to probably be the reason why. Like who's the most mobile quarterback that they've played?
I think you could probably make the argument for Will Howard, Garrett Green. Well, Kevin Jennings, obviously.
Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah,
Dylan Gabriel. I think it's Jennings, but that game was so weird that like you kind of want to throw it out because it got so out of hand so early.
Yeah.
I think probably Garrett Green, I would say.
Yeah, I mean the Gabriel piece to that too was interesting, but I think the thing that impresses me when I watch Riley Leonard is like the reckless abandonment for his body. Pete, has there been any, I'm sure the coaching staff's probably gone crazy trying to corral him a bit. Has there been any progress made there to be like, hey man, reel it in a little bit here. Like we need you. Don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't look like there has been. Yeah.
And I asked him about it maybe 2 weeks ago. It was before Georgia, after Indiana, about like, have the coaches talked to you about like, could you stop jumping? Like, could you just try to stop jumping over the pile? And he's like, yeah, they don't bring that up anymore. It's a lost cause. Like, so yeah, I think we're done with that at Notre Dame. Like if Riley Leonard goes out, he's going to go out on his own terms. But there was definitely a time in the year. And I do think it's like the arc of this season for Notre Dame, there's been so much of it built around Mike Denbrock, their offense coordinator, and Riley Leonard, their quarterback, like how they fit together. Because I'm not sure that either of them saw them fitting together the way that they actually have. And I don't know, like with Kotelnicki and Allar, like has there been a similar curve there, even if it like has looked different and the end product is different than what like Notre Dame's offense is with Riley Leonard?
Yeah, I think in a usual year it would look like a curve, but instead it just kind of looked like last year's offense to start, where it wasn't very good, right? So any curve was going to be kind of masked by the fact that there was such a low starting point by the way they performed in big games last year. But yeah, I think there's an adaptation with how Kotelnicki has used mobile quarterbacks in the past, and Allar has run a little bit more this year. But the biggest thing I think has been the emphasis on the running game and kind of leaning into some of those running backs, and the passing game kind of hasn't, it hasn't looked maybe like it's had to take such a leap just because there's nowhere, like you can go nowhere but up. Like it was so bad at times last year.
Bad.
Yeah, like the fact that Tyler Warren had over 500 yards was fantastic for Penn State, let alone 1,000, right? And Trey Wallace getting 700 seems miraculous, but it's all just kind of, he was operating from such a low base that anything he did to improve the offense, I think, was going to make it look much better.
Before we continue, I want to thank our sponsors of both podcasts, Obvious Shirts. Notre Dame fans and Penn State fans can go to obviousshirts.com and see some awesome t-shirts, quarter zips, hoodies, you name it. A lot of playoff themes within there. They've been a great partner to us, and it's been a thrill to see all of these shirts and hoodies being tweeted at us at Notre Dame Stadium at different football games throughout the course of the season. So if you have any suggestions, by all means, send them our way. There have been some pretty obvious ones, no pun intended, with thanks to good old Pat Coogan, that have been great sellers. But appreciate our partners at Obvious Shirts, and please go to obviousshirts.com to get your Notre Dame and Penn State merchandise today.
Also want to thank Roback, sort of early sponsor for the Independent. You can go to roback.com and use promo code Irish for 20% off your first order. Quarter zip, sweatshirts, hoodies, joggers, all your workout apparel, casual apparel, roback.com, including officially licensed Notre Dame gear too. So roback.com, promo code Irish for 20% off your first order.
And if you want to support that from the Penn State side of things at Roback, you can use code TND20. That's TND20 as in the Nittany Dispatch 20. Looks like John has a Roback hat on right now. I had one on today at the pool earlier, so it looks. Am I correct, John?
I would be wearing a Roback hoodie as well, but it was very cold when I left this morning, and I was layering up in a big way. But yes, always Roback all the time. And like Audrey said, code TND20 for 20% off your first order.
Pete, a lot of talk about running and jumping. We have not mentioned the word Jeremiyah Love yet. What's his status? It candidly doesn't read all that promising. I mean, I think he'll play, but how effective will he be?
Yeah, I think that is basically the Penn State version of Abdul Carter, where are you going to get something out of Jeremiyah Love? Yes. Are you going to get a 6-yard hurdle where he doesn't break stride? Probably not. Are you going to get a 98-yard touchdown run? Probably not. So I think that having watched Notre Dame's practice, the days are running together, but I think that was Saturday. His knee was braced up. Not a good sign for a running back. When we saw him practice 5 days before Indiana, he sort of sleeve on his knee, which was he had an MCL injury against USC. He was fine against Indiana, but re-injured against Georgia. He'll play. I don't know how much though. But I think the most important thing is, like, you're just not going to see the NFL running back now in Jeremiyah Love that what he's been all year. He had scored a rushing touchdown in every game they had played. So I think that, you go to Jadarian Price at that point, very capable running back, probably going to lead into Riley Leonard a lot more of the rusher. I want to say that he had 14 rushing attempts against Georgia, which was season high. I think probably you're going 14, 15 at that point. I think that they're really going to have to lean hard on Riley Leonard, the runner, on Thursday night, I think, for the offense to go.
Yeah, I think the one thing I thought about too with that is what is the value then of Love kind of playing, right? If he's banged up and doesn't look the same, and you two obviously know much better than I in this situation, but is it even worth taking those snaps away from Price against a really good Penn State run defense when, he is not near 100%?
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing them not trying it, but I could see it. Jeremiyah Love finishing the game with 2 carries for 4 yards. I didn't think he was going to have a great game against Indiana, and then he, runs the entire length of the field to essentially break the game open immediately. So it's kind of one of those things where you wouldn't put anything past him. But if I had to guess, I would guess that whatever prop bet is out there for Jeremiyah Love's rushing yardage in this game, I would probably go under it.
Pete's
that was my thinking. I'm sorry, go ahead, Audrey.
No, Pete's out here to get people rich. And that's kind of the Abdul Carter piece too, was James Franklin's point was, well, how effective will he be if he plays, right? I think that's what it comes down to. Both of these guys, Thursday during warmups, like I think we're going to be like hawks watching both of those guys, seeing what, if anything, that they're doing.
I would
What
think,
exactly
too,
is
that-
Abdul Carter's injury, by the way? Arm? Like it
Yeah,
seems
we'll call it
bigger than usual.
Shoulder.
we'll call it upper arm, shoulder. But I think these two are kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum with regard to the injury, right? Where Love is like, you try him and see what you can get out of him. I would be surprised if Carter isn't able to have an impact on this game one way or another. The other thing is, if he's spying, it's a little bit less stressful on a shoulder. Obviously, he's going to have to engage blocks and shed blocks and everything too. I'm not naive to that point, but I think that this is definitely, kind of the opposite of Love, I guess, where you would expect him to play, and it's just a matter of, is it 100% or is it 90%, rather than, is 40 or 50 or 60% good enough to get real value out of it.
Well, here's my question with that, John, and this is again just me thinking out loud here. When you look at Abdul Carter, right, projected top 10 pick, who's making the call if he's playing Thursday? Is it Abdul? Is it Abdul's family? Is it Penn State? Is it like, if he's, perhaps a little bit limited, like, does that factor in? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but I think that is something to kind of keep in mind when you have a guy with this high of a draft stock, obviously wants to play. But I just wonder, if you kind of get into an area where it's like, hey, can you do further damage by playing? I don't know. We never obviously get specifics of injuries, but that I think is just kind of something to keep in mind, because he was on the sideline last week at that Boise State game, and you could see, I mean, even afterward when they were celebrating with the trophy, he was doing everything right-handed. Like, he wasn't even trying to reach for that trophy with his left hand. So I know he's tweeted out or posted on Instagram a bunch of things this week of him in the cold tub, and I needed someone to explain the Star Wars stuff to me because he was tweeting and posting a lot of Star Wars things. But apparently that all trends to a guy who's leaning toward recovery and playing this week.
This is an injury note, but personnel note. When Bo Prabula went in the transfer portal, right ahead of the playoff, I thought that's going to be a difference maker at some point for Penn State. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I just think they're going to miss him at some point. That obviously hasn't reared its ugly head yet. The competition hasn't been the best. How could that be a factor this game or next game if Penn State were to win?
Say, Audrey, you want?
Okay,
yeah. Well, because I was going to say, because this is the John goes on a spiel about Bo Prabula. The Bo Prabula package didn't help Penn State, but I'll let Audrey handle this one first.
So yeah, trying to keep John calm. He's had a very stressful day on tarmacs and bigger runways than he's used to. It was interesting, right? I think the Prabula usage, especially this year with Andy Kotelnicki, it was, hey, this is one of our best athletes, so we're going to find a way to get him on the field. Like, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're committed to doing. And that's what Penn State did. Now, where I think the bigger issue is here is what happens if Drew Allar gets hurt, right? Then your backup quarterback is true freshman Ethan Grunkemeyer, who played mop-up time against SMU, and fans were like, well, why didn't this guy play earlier in the year? Well, you were banking on Bo Prabula being here. The other interesting wrinkle to this is apparently, per like some guys posting on Instagram, Prabula was like at the Fiestival watching. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't been able to connect with the guy. Nobody has. So like, again, this is someone who was like beloved by teammates, goes in the portal. We know he's going to transfer to Missouri. But yeah, it's been weird. I mean, he was out on the practice field the Sunday of SMU week. Penn State thought he was going to be in the game. And then it's like, no, I'm going in the portal like I need to do what's best for me. So it eliminates one thing or many things because of the Prabula package that defenses have to worry about. But I do think like the bigger issue or upside is like if Allar, again, who's been much more mobile this year, like you guys talk about Riley Leonard kind of being crazy with his legs and willing to take hits. Allar's been much more at least risk averse with that, but he has been much more mobile. And so, Penn State potentially doesn't win that game at Wisconsin this year without Bo Prabula coming on when Allar gets hurt. So, it is definitely a significant loss. And with Andy Kotelnicki, you just like, I keep thinking, okay, like the guy's going to continue to do crazy things each and every week because that's what he does. But yeah, I do think they're a little bit shorthanded in that regard. But I also think Andy probably has something else in his bag of tricks that he's going to lean into.
Yeah, and I like I said, I'm just never a fan of taking arguably one of your best offensive players off the field, or kind of taking him out of a play and putting the backup in, as good as Prebula was. And I think it's kind of like the old take the club out of the bag analogy to limit Kotelnicki in some way, and that kind of allows him to lean into what they've done best, because, carries are better served given to Singleton and Kaytron Allen, right? And throws are better served made by Drew Allar, and receptions are better when they're caught by Tyler Warren. It's one of those things that there were some situations where I thought he was helpful. And as people will probably remember, I pushed back on the Wisconsin thing too, because I think what really won them that game was Jalen Reed getting a very well-timed pick six and the defense kind of turning it up at the right time. And there's no doubt that Bo Prebula made some big time throws in that game too. But yeah, I think in some ways it's going to kind of force the offense to lean into its best players rather than, and not to say that this is what was necessarily happening, but at times coaches are trying to placate players to keep them, right? That you want to keep guys happy, you want to keep them at the program, especially with the portal now. And I wonder how much of that impacted Prebula's role throughout the season. And you look at the big games, those snaps weren't as frequent. So I'm not necessarily pessimistic that it's going to harm them down the stretch here.
Yeah, like John and Audrey, I'm curious to hear more about Drew. Like one more bit of business for us. We want to thank another sponsor of ours, Future Fans. You want to experience the playoffs with your kids and make sure your kids are ready to experience the magic. Use Future Fans, the storybook and activity box that helps little kids become big fans. Designed for age 4 to 8, it helps kids understand the rules of football, downs, a beanbag toss that helps things like 4 tries for 6 points. And you can go to futurefans.com, use the promo code IRISH for 15% off your first order of $49.99. That's the Future Fans activity box, and you can get 15% off your first order with promo code Irish. So, John and Audrey, getting back to Allar, I'm interested, like, because he came in with this huge reputation, what his career arc has been like there. Because I think when he shows up, you're thinking like, hey, this is maybe a 3-and-done type of player, which, again, if they win the national championship, maybe he still will be. But, like, where is he better? And, like, as someone who's only watched Penn State sparingly, the Drew Allar that I saw against Oregon was different than the Drew Allar I saw against Ohio State earlier in the year. Like, where is his game peaking right now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things with Allar is his confidence, right? He's a self-professed emotional guy, right? Like, he is kind of willing to ride the wave a little bit of how he's feeling. And when he's confident and when he's on the same page with his receivers, he looks like he did against Oregon. When he's not, and honestly, the Ohio State game is interesting because he made a touchdown throw at the end of the first half that was picked off because Trey Wallace kind of gave it up. And so it's one of those things where that can kind of kill the confidence. And it, maybe he's a little hesitant to make some of those throws that he would have earlier in the game. And I think that's the biggest thing with him. And that can change in an instant. We don't have to do the momentum argument on this podcast too, as I tend to do. But, it's one of those things that Allar's confidence kind of dictates how he goes. When he's at his best, he's confident. He's trying throws that, maybe you're saying, oh no, and then it sneaks through because he has the arm talent. And when he's at his worst, he's hesitating and he's not making those throws and he's not making quick decisions.
I think part of that too is the overly emotional piece sometimes. If you watch Allar, if you go back in the Minnesota game, Penn State, they're struggling early on. And there was a moment where he came to the sideline. He was downright livid and he's mad and he's yelling, and James Franklin went over and sat down with him and met him at eye level and was like, hey, calm down. This is the overly emotional part that we hadn't seen before. All this previous offseason, it was, well, can Drew Allar step up? Can he be more vocal? Can he be a leader? And then he comes out against West Virginia and it's like, oh my gosh, the guy might need to reel it in a little bit. So I'm wondering, if Notre Dame comes out, blitzes the daylights out of him, how flustered does he get? Do we see some of that overly emotional stuff pop up? Because to me, that's kind of one way that I think Notre Dame can get to him, because he will make those flashes where you say, man, this is, we always hear the pro comparison, the Josh Allen. I'm starting to come around to on the Justin Herbert comparison. I think that's another one. Big arm, but he's added a lot of mobility to his game this year. He will make some crazy throws. And then you'll see other ones that you're like, man, this is a money throw that you have to make, and you didn't. So the consistency piece for him is where it gets interesting. But yeah, Pete, I think you hit on a good point. It's Allar said he's coming back next year, but again, what factors maybe change this if this run continues for Penn State? James Franklin said this week that he thinks Penn State's receivers have turned the corner, that he feels like they've got enough in that room to win with, and that we're not talking and writing enough about the receiving core after all offseason was spent talking and writing about the receiving core. So I think that's the other part of it too. It's Drew Allar has a Tyler Warren to work with, but what else does he have, right? And that's kind of the question there where you say, man, if this guy had an elite top-end wide receiver, what else might we see? But again, I think there are a lot of teams in the country that would like to have that.
Pete, on paper, Notre Dame was a worse team than Georgia, and anyone who watched that game saw they just completely flipped that game on its head, really in the middle eight. But that second half, Georgia never seriously threatened. Even on paper, if you look at that box score, Georgia outgained them. Georgia did this. What is it about Marcus Freeman's group that has them playing with such confidence and has them being very comfortable taking risks? I mean, he said when they ran the fake punt, Freeman said something to the effect of, we ran that so much in practice that we couldn't screw it up. Like, how has that implemented itself throughout the course of the season, especially in a season that didn't exactly get off on the right foot?
Yeah, I think he's done a great job of like figuring out which levers need to be pulled and when. Like they have more fourth down conversions this year than his previous 2 years combined. The fake punts, fake field goals have just been sort of like that. That's just part of their game plans now. And it's like, even if you watch the Georgia game, like Georgia barely rushed Notre Dame's kicker because they were deathly afraid that Notre Dame was going to run a fake. And so Mitch Jeter just got to sit back there and bomb, I think, 3 45-yard plus field goals. The fake at the end that wasn't a fake, that just was basically a screw you with Kirby Smart. Like, we're going to make you use your last time out. That I think that Freeman, like, this is who Freeman is. And I think it took a couple years for him to feel comfortable, like, letting this out. But I think he's sort of gotten away, like, he's put away the Jim Tressel sweater vest that he grew up as a coach wearing. And now he's just like letting it rip. And I think the players really respond to that. Defensively, they play more man defense, than anyone in the country other than Purdue, which is like ruins the stat. But like, point being, like, they play a lot of man and they're really effective at it. And that's like, but I just think like Freeman has figured out a way to like just let go. And I need this team to be aggressive because that's how we're going to win at the highest level. And getting back to Brian Kelly, I just never felt that way. It was like mess around and like try to win the game in the fourth quarter, whereas this Notre Dame team wants to take it away from you early, and that's a completely different mindset. And I mean, you're right. You look at the box score; it'd be pretty easy to not watch the Georgia game and think like, "Oh, maybe Notre Dame got outplayed." If there wasn't the kickoff return touchdown and there wasn't the strip sack right before halftime, Notre Dame, I'm very confident Notre Dame still would have won that game because they were actually out hitting Georgia, which is not something I've really ever seen from Notre Dame before. So yeah, but I think that sort of gets back to Marcus Freeman's mentality and letting it rip in a way that Notre Dame teams typically have not.
Pete, when you said all of that, what my brain went to, were you ever a sweater vest guy?
Never a sweater. I have the Roback vests. You can use the promo code Irish for 20%. I have many vests from Roback.com, but sweater vests, not my thing. That's a little, I think it's like, I don't know, the being 6'3" and like lanky arms. I feel self-conscious with the vest. Like my arms just go on forever.
Yeah, I can't do a vest either. I'm with it. It's just, I'm 6'2". I'm a bigger guy though, so it makes me look even bulkier. They're not ideal for me. It is funny though. I don't think it's a coincidence that both of these head coaches are being lauded for their aggressiveness and find themselves in the semifinals. As someone, again, advocate of team never punt, I think this is how you get here to this point in the season. It's very cool to see two coaches are kind of, like you said, letting it rip.
Yeah, I got stopped by a Nittany Dispatch listener in O'Hare this past week, coming back to Arizona, who wanted to bring up some questions to, hope he's listening right now. I'm sure he is. I had some questions for John about the fact that he would never punt and that he would never even travel a punter. So yeah, I just want to know, our guy, hope he's listening out there. because John has some hot special teams takes that
Listen,
if ever Notre Dame, we know, listen, special teams is going to be big in this game. If they need some scorching hot takes in the third phase, John's your guy.
some of it's hyperbolic. I would punt on occasion, but the general
You're not
philosophy
even bringing a
is,
punter.
well, I mean, Tyler Warren can punt, but like, 4th and
We saw
28.
how well that went. Yeah.
Yeah, well, true.
Marty Biaggi doesn't punt either. It's okay. And he's been
Yeah.
maybe the best special teams coordinator in the country this year.
Boom, there you go. Never punt.
But it's Big Ten country. Punting is winning, as always.
Right. Yeah.
Pete, how is Al Golden's defense still doing this? I mean, I wouldn't say I counted them out, but when Benjamin Morrison went down midseason, I thought, okay, they're going to really have to dig deep here to make the playoff and not take a massive step back. And they've had several injuries since then. And again, just completely took Georgia's offense out of that game. I mean, how have they gotten better despite being deep into the reserves now?
Yeah, it's shocking that you could lose an All-American corner and you lose Howard Cross, who was an All-American a year ago, for basically all of November. He sprains his ankle against Georgia. You lose Riley Mills against Indiana with a serious knee injury. You lost both of your best edge rushers in Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore in September. So yeah, it's bizarre to me that Notre Dame's defense could be as consistently good as it's been. And I mean, to be fair, they have played a lot of backup quarterbacks. That's why I'm so interested in Drew Allar, because I think he's by far the best quarterback Notre Dame will have played this year. Tyler Shuck at Louisville, I think, is a good player who played great in that game. But Notre Dame's played a lot of backup quarterbacks. Georgia Tech, USC, A&M was not what we thought they were offensively with Connor Wegman. So, I mean, they've made a lot of bad or mediocre quarterbacks look like they should take up pickleball. Drew Allar he's an NFL prospect, maybe not this year, but certainly next year. And so how you move him around or try to move him around is fascinating. I mean, I thought Georgia's offensive line was awful. Penn State's offensive line is much better than that. And I think Notre Dame also got some out of nowhere performances against Georgia on their defensive line. RJ Oben was a guy who had the strip sack. He looked like kind of a misread in the transfer portal for Notre Dame for basically 13 games, and just out of nowhere was outstanding against Georgia. Junior Tuihalamaka recovered the fumble. Again, he was a third-team player in September, really turning it on late. So I think that they've certainly got some breaks in scheduling in terms of personnel that they've faced. But I think Al Golden's done a really good job of getting backups to play better when they've had to. And the fact that they could go out and out-hit Georgia when they're down essentially 5 starters on defense was really impressive to me, no matter who Georgia was playing at quarterback.
Audrey and John, I'm sure you've seen one, if not all, of Pat Coogan's viral speeches at this point. Who's the equivalent of that for Penn State? And I will say, and Audrey will definitely remember this, I don't know if John will, they give me Deion Butler vibes. Remember, we are legends. They don't have the legacy to hold against Ohio State. That was the first viral video before viral videos were a thing, way back when we were in college. But
I think I was 13 then, 13 years old, maybe somewhere around there.
John was in diapers.
You still have eligibility, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might.
That's why you don't want to punt. But who's that vocal leader for Penn State?
Yeah, on the defense, it's Devontae Thomas, the defensive tackle, 6th-year guy. And this is somebody, when you talk about having a coach on the field, he's kind of that guy. But in terms of crazy intensity, Denai Dennis Sutton, their Penn State's defensive end, this guy, I mean, his helmet popped off in the Fiesta Bowl, and he's looking at the Penn State sideline, and you can just see his eyes. And his teammates are always telling us he's kind of got those crazy eyes, and he's a different guy when he's in the game. And oh my gosh, he looked at the sideline, and I was like, oh yeah, this guy is he's ready to go. So if you want to watch something crazy, watch him when he warms up. There is a next gear with the intensity piece. Offensively though, John, who would be
there's
Warren doesn't say much at all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost Kodwinnicki, right? Because he just kind of sets this very calm tone, this very, you know what I mean? There's no rah-rahness to it. There's a lot of confidence. There's a lot of, from their perspective, like we're better than you and we know it, like kind of stuff at times, but there's no like invigorating speech really. Sometimes Drew Allar will give one.
Maybe Nick Dawkins, the center.
Yeah,
maybe
Nick Dawkins. But yeah, it's very much a defensive thing, which is unsurprising when you see how this defense plays. And to back up what Audrey said, deny Dennis Sutton, I think is someone we both got to know as a recruit and is like an incredibly kind kid, like still is. Like every interaction I've had with him is pleasant and just turns into a lunatic on the football field. Like loses all bearings, like is just out there. And that's kind of, he's the first off the bus type of guy, right? Like the 6'6", 260, 270 pound defensive end that just is all intense all the time when he is on the football field.
Yeah, and I don't know who has it this week, but they typically, when Penn State gets off the bus, they have like a big hit hammer. And somebody on the defense will come off with like this massive sledgehammer. Does Notre Dame, do they have something like that?
They do not. They're pretty light on the props. Like when did they? I feel like they've had some over the years, but
Sam Hartman carried the shillelagh last year, and I feel like I've seen others carry it.
Yeah, that is kind of like a practice reward kind of thing. But
Penn State also has a BMF belt. And Audrey, do you want to explain what that stands for?
Well, John, I think this is all you.
No, it is a wrestling belt that they give to, I believe it's the best offensive player, right? And they do the this presentation, like they had guys come out to like the Undertaker's wrestling entrance for it to give out this belt, and they've definitely made it more fun after the turnover chain didn't follow Manny Diaz really, and kind of disappointed I think all of us. But yeah, Penn State's added some more of that stuff in recent years, definitely than they had in the past.
I think it's worth to say the turnover chain, like. I think, Matt, you may have been there, but it was here in Miami when the turnover chain peaked.
Yes,
for Notre Dame Miami in 2017, and it was like covering a college football game that was played in a nightclub. I don't think it will be quite that loud, but I mean, Audrey, I think this is before John you hopped on the show. Like, what do you expect like the fan makeup to be on Thursday night?
Yeah, that's a good question because again, the Penn State fans I mentioned earlier, like they had this one circled. We're going to Miami. I mean, Notre Dame is just like that fan base is just as crazy, right? And everybody wants to get out of the winter at this point. Like I think maybe for Notre Dame, and maybe I'm misreading this, correct me if I am, but I think for you all there might be a little bit more of a hey, let's save up for Atlanta, where I think Penn State's fans might be, this is it, maybe like let's go all in for this one. But it's a Thursday night, right? Like there's that piece of like, who's going to be, they will, because it's college football, but like who's going to be drinking all Thursday afternoon? Well, plenty of fans from both the teams that we cover. But yeah, like to me, that's the other piece of this whole playoff run. It's like you mentioned earlier, Pete, like we have no idea what day it is just covering this. I had some Penn State fans on my flight back from Arizona that were like, we'll sit this one out because we just were at the Fiesta Bowl, but if they make the national championship, like we will find a way, I think that's like the you got to be there moment. I think it's going to be a really good juiced crowd, but I don't know. I mean, I think we're maybe a 50-50 or a 60-40 with Penn State. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have real expectations for this. Like I as I think you're about to say, Pete, like I really don't know. I think this is the one that, like Audrey said, that Penn State fans had circled, but at the same time, there's probably some confidence that they can make it to Atlanta now that they've won two. So maybe people are going to push that back now too. Audrey mentioned it's Thursday when the game is played. That is news to me. I did not know what day of the week it is now, what day is coming. I just knew it was in 3 days. That is how we've been operating.
You're going to want to know every week.
Yeah. Want to know every day. I can't even do weeks at this point.
Yeah, this is the East Coast Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's like I think
New York have some crazy watch.
New Orleans is much harder to get to than Miami. So I think that would suggest there might be more Notre Dame fans here than there were in the Sugar Bowl, which like that was probably 70-30 or 65-35 Georgia. I mean, it was a very hardcore Georgia crowd. And obviously the game gets pushed back and that like affects a lot of things too. But I know, I mean, just like anecdotally, Notre Dame fans from Florida, there are many of them. I think this is an easy draw that they've been circling for a while. And I think like the Notre Dame fans from outside this area, like I've talked to a few from California who came out for the IU game, skipped the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. And I think, I don't know, this is maybe where the fan bases differ a little bit. Like, I think that the Georgia win juices the Notre Dame fan base to show up on Thursday in a way that Boise State probably wouldn't, just by the nature of who you beat.
No, I think that's good. I think that's accurate because I think it was very much a pro Boise State crowd at the Fiesta Bowl. I mean, it was pregame, we're down on the field, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of orange in here. And one of the different things with these fan bases, and again, this is just kind of my new exposure to Boise State, their fan base has a lot of signs. Like, they come in there with all these signs, and I'm looking around, and it's like, these Ashton Genty have my kids signs and all these things that are going on. And I'm like, the Penn State fan base does not travel with signs. But again, that was just kind of a little bit different for me seeing all of that because they very much like that was their thing. But yeah, I think this is a game that you say, okay, if you're, and I always try to put my fan hat on, right? My Packers fan hat. When you win a game, like Notre Dame just did, you say, I'm going all in. I got to see him because I want to say that I can see them during a national championship season, right? Like that was me with the Packers during their Super Bowl run in 2010. It's like, all right, I'm going to Atlanta after they win one game because I got to see if they can beat the 1 seed.
John, how old were you in 2010? Because you're like marking every year that we mentioned with your age.
15 years old then.
15, okay.
But I just, Audrey with the nerve to bring up the Packers right now during Audrey's
I'm not poking any bears this
Go
week.
Birds. You know, we don't need to be doing that. Go Birds.
You made that a thing, John. I wasn't doing that. But yeah, I saw something. I think the Fan Fest down here is like Wednesday night at like 8:00 or something. It's
early.
all different in Miami, I guess.
That's early in Miami, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's early on my sleep schedule too. 4 a.m. sleep time. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, you're young. We get it. Yeah. I will say, look, every East Coaster has a vacation home in Florida, and the East Coast football teams, generally speaking, are Penn State and Notre Dame. So I would lean to say Notre Dame has more fans just because they have a bigger fan base, but I think both fans base are going to completely show off for this one.
I think the other interesting piece is when you look at like a lot of the Pennsylvania communities with all the Catholic people, right? Like there's a lot of that. Your Scrantons and Wilkes-Barres and all those types of places. I know even like my mom's side of the family, like from Pennsylvania, they have no connections to Notre Dame other than like they're Catholic and this is their team, right? And some of them have season tickets and they're very much into it. So I think there's going to be a lot of like intense discussions and even, Pennsylvania bars where it's like, hey, no, you're getting a lot of Notre Dame fans here just because of the national pull, the Catholic pull. So that's going to be really fun to see too. Like it's just, you talk about the ultimate helmet matchup. This is it. I mean, this is when the playoff path was kind of laid out for Penn State. I was like, man, if you can get Penn State, Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, like that is absolutely going to be beautiful. And we're lucky enough to see it.
It's
no names on their jersey. Game. Well, one of them.
Yeah, right. But it's the ultimate helmet game. You know what I mean? This is the one that people, like you said, Audrey, would circle and like kind of root for if you're big into college football history. And I'm excited for it from that standpoint. It's just going to be very cool to see them line up. And as Matt alluded to, Notre Dame has adjusted their uniforms much more than Penn State has, though, in recent years.
Yeah, that's true. And I do think that I was talking to Seth Emerson, our colleague at The Athletic who covers Georgia, and before the game last week, we were like, what would be best for college football? Like, what would be the best Final Four? And it's like you could have a debate about Oregon or Ohio State because, like, one, you get a little West Coast vibe. They're going there too. But we're not that far off from, like, the best that you could get for, like, interest in the sport on Thursday and Friday between Texas, Ohio State, and then Notre Dame, Penn State. I think it's going to be a phenomenal watch on both nights.
I mean, all Big Ten championship game last year. I think we all think Ohio State's probably going to at least beat Texas. So it would be an all Big Ten or all Midwest championship game this year, whether it's Notre Dame or Penn State. I just think it's good for the sport to be more national in that regard, even though no one's crying for the Big Ten here. I just think we've seen the all SEC thing a few too many times. They're still living off that, as we've all heard ad nauseum.
Heard a lot of,
think it'll be really good for the sport.
Yeah, but sometimes it just means more, you know?
Hey, I'm in Illinois. North Central College just won their third D3 national title in the last 5 years last night. I know they're not getting their proper respect, but there's some good football in the Midwest, as we can all attest to. We're going to save our predictions for our individual shows, but I want to go around the room here and everyone give a key to the game or an X factor to the game that you think will ultimately decide this thing.
I'm going to go with Penn State running back Nick Singleton. Penn State's run game has absolutely been on one here this last month, which is not what we were saying early on in the year. while Drew Allar, of course, is important, I think Nick Singleton is kind of Penn State's path to victory. If there's one good path laid out, I think it's with the run game.
For me, it's like the ability to move Drew Allar around when he doesn't want to move. And I like Notre Dame brings a ton of pressure. That's why they get away with playing man so much, is because they have an extra rusher. And like even without Riley Mills and Botello and Traore, like they've done a good job getting pressure. Like Gunnar Stockton really was kind of running for his life a lot last week in the Sugar Bowl. So it's like making Drew Allar move into a spot he doesn't want to move in. That to me is the key, because if they can't move him around and he can sort of sit back there and look like a prototypical pro prospect quarterback, then I like Penn State. And if they can get him on the run when he doesn't want to be, then I like Notre Dame. So it's kind of an Al Golden schematics is the key to the game for me.
This is the low-hanging fruit, but I think it's Penn State's ability to stop the Notre Dame running game, just because they've had so much success against these one-dimensional type teams this year. They've done it at Boise State, West Virginia, these teams that can't throw the ball, Wisconsin, Minnesota, even if you want to include them. They've generally been able to stop from scoring and win those games. It's when you can throw the ball too that the defense is put in a bad spot. So if Penn State is able to limit Price and if Love ends up being very limited and can't go and they can limit Riley Leonard, I think that's their path to victory. And frankly, putting Notre Dame in a spot where they have to throw the ball, right? Getting up a possession or two early could do wonders, I think, for either team in this game.
I think the Georgia, not blueprint, but the way it went for Notre Dame, I think could ultimately be the X factor here, where I think on paper, these teams are very evenly matched. I think at full health, like Penn State is close to, that defense is probably a little bit more talented than Notre Dame's is. And yet Notre Dame's been so good at winning the turnover battle, stealing possessions on special teams. I think that would ultimately be a difference. I don't say that to say, big game James, here he goes again. He's going to get out coached in a big game, but Notre Dame, which let's face it, none of us would have said this after NIU or really at any point until late in the season, has had difference makers on their sideline. And I think ultimately that could be a deciding factor. I did want to ask actually, Audrey and John, one thing as we talk about defense. You mentioned Manny Diaz earlier. Am I wrong for thinking this group's been less than the sum of its parts? I just look at the talent, the high-level NFL talent there, and then I see games like Bowling Green, the end of Ohio State, the first half against Oregon. I think they should be much better, playing much better as a unit with that kind of talent on defense.
There are some moments, first half against Bowling Green, definitely one of those moments where you're
who hasn't
who hasn't had one of those
Max schools,
against a Max school?
Yeah, you're just like,
you just can't take them serious.
I think it was even a noon kick too.
They're playing maybe the best tight end in the country. Sorry, I can't say that around Penn State.
That's
Don't say that too loud.
There have been some moments with inconsistencies when you kind of look at it. I think this defense has gotten better. I think middle linebacker Kobe King's an important piece to it. But yeah, I mean, I feel like this is going to be one of those Penn State defenses in 2 or 3 years. We're going to look and we're going to see all these guys playing, or most of these guys playing in the NFL. And we're going to be like, was this as good as it got, or is there a next level with Tom Allen for this defense to kind of get to? Because, you've got special talent, and this is a group that, again, this whole Penn State roster has kind of been geared up for this year. Like, Allar's a third-year guy, Singleton, Kaytron Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter. Like, this is your run right now. But, yeah, I think that's fair to say, Matt. I think that's a fair assessment. John, do you disagree with me, since that tends to be how these things go?
I can if you want me to, but no. I think the general thing with them is not that they don't take lesser opponents seriously, but they're going to be very vanilla in those situations, like Bowling Green, and so they're kind of going to give up those underneath throws, those quick passes, because they're playing so far off the line of scrimmage with their corners, and they're in some ways playing methodology wise, like a Fangio style defense, right? Where you're bending, but not breaking. You're going to buckle down in the red zone and not give up points in those situations. If you get the ball out quickly, you can beat up on a defense like that, and you can string together some drives because it's kind of reliant on the offense making mistakes. I think that the times that the defense has struggled, it's when the offense hasn't made mistakes. And that's, it's going to be, I think, a key on Thursday night, but has been the kind of swing factor for Penn State's defense this year in those kind of moments.
Well, I can't wait for this game. I wish I could be down there with you, but John, I trust that you'll keep these old heads out late at night and show them a good time down on South Beach. the way you were born to do. But we will both be back with our individual team episodes and full game previews and predictions later on this week. I believe there's a big media day down there tomorrow, where you guys will get a bunch of players and coaches to speak and have more insights as well. But should be a blast. Looking forward to seeing it. I'm sure you guys will enjoy it down there. And yes, I bring this up because I think the last time I was in that stadium, it was Oklahoma, Alabama media day. Bob Diaco was Oklahoma's defense coordinator. And he pulled me aside and said, "Matt, is this the same building we lost to Alabama in all those years ago?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." It did undergo a major renovation, but it's the same building. As much as everyone wants to forget that night, I can assure you it happened right here. So hopefully it'll be better for everyone involved this time around on Thursday.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you guys. Thanks for having us on. Glad we could do this, and I hope both of our listenerships get something out of this.
Yeah, and I promise, Matt, I will make sure I keep them out as late as humanly possible all week.
Awesome. Looking forward to seeing a hungover colleague tomorrow when we do our show.
If I have my way, yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you guys later this week.